brought to you by thegiveawaygeek.com. Win board games, electronics, and gift cards at thegiveawaygeek.com. The geek that keeps on giving. Everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today I'm bringing you a review of Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. Now this is a game that very recently came out. It's very brand new. It was kind of a surprise announcement that Fantasy Flight sprung on everybody. It was, hey, you know, here's this game and next week it's coming out. You know, you don't really see that level of secrecy in board game companies very often, but lately Fantasy Flight's been doing that kind of stuff. So, you know, I'm not sure if that's a marketing thing or what. I mean, I guess it worked because you had a pretty immediate buzz surrounding this game as soon as it happened. So, what do we think about this game? Well, Mansions of Madness 1st Edition was a game that most people seem to think was either a really good game or a pretty good game, except it had some flaws. And a lot of those flaws revolved around the keeper, because it was a one versus many game. So up to 4 players would play investigators and 1 person would play the keeper, who was in charge of all the monsters and all the terrible things that would happen to the investigators. The trick was, as the keeper, you had to set up the entire board beforehand, and you had to seed these cards that were very similar to the item cards that are in the 2nd edition. Had to seed these all around the board, and there were trap cards and obstacle cards and all this different stuff. You had to set it up just right. Very detailed explanation that came with the game for each scenario, explaining how to set it up. And if you didn't set it up just right, if you mess up and put one card in the wrong spot, if it was an important card, if it was a key or a puzzle or you know, something like that, a locked door, if you put it in the wrong room in the wrong spot, it could screw up the entire game, and maybe you wouldn't even realize it until you're an hour and a half into the game. And that was pretty bad. A lot of people did not like that. Even if you did get it set up properly, it would take, if you weren't familiar with the game, you're probably going to spend 45 minutes setting the game up. If you were familiar with the game, between 20 and 30 minutes setting it up, and an equal amount of time tearing it down. So with all that in mind, 2nd edition comes out and removes the keeper completely from the game. Now the keeper is on this app that you can download for all the major devices, Android, iOS, Amazon Fire or whatever, or Kindle Fire or whatever that thing's called. So you get that app, and that takes care of all the bad guy stuff. It removed a bunch of decks of cards from the game that were part of the keeper, mechanisms. And so now in that app, it takes care of all that stuff. It's basically, the app is like a bunch of different decks of cards, and it's tossing them out to you. Now, does that take away some of the strategy? Does it feel too random what happens with the app? Because obviously with a human keeper, they're going to be strategizing how they do stuff, when they do certain effects, that sort of thing. The app feels like it does a pretty good job. I have noticed that there are times when there's what's called mythos events. And by the way, I usually try to say this at the beginning of the videos, or I'm trying to remember to recently. With my reviews, I don't do any gameplay or how to play or anything like that. Go look at some previous videos. I have a how to play, and I'm doing a gameplay right now. So if you want to see that stuff, you can find some previous videos of mine. So back to the app. During the mythos event step, I have found that sometimes it will say this mythos event affects, and these are basically bad things that happen to investigators, affects all investigators in the kitchen, let's say. But there's no investigators in the kitchen. Now, that's something that would not have happened in 1st edition, because the keeper never would have done a mythos event that affected only investigators in the kitchen. So there is that issue where sometimes a mythos event won't do anything because there's nobody in that room. Now, you do see that the bigger the map gets, the later you get into a stage, the more likely it is to see that, because there's more options. Now, not all mythos events affect specific rooms, so sometimes they will actually just call out, okay, this one's going to affect the scientist. This one's going to affect the parapsychologist. So, this one's going to affect the doctor. Or it uses their actual names. And so most of the time, the Mythos events are going to do something. But on occasion, you're going to have those that are just complete misfires that don't affect anybody because it's calling out a room or a situation that isn't anybody on the board right now. So then let's look at the monsters. The monsters now obviously have scripted movement as far as if you've played Wrath of a any of the Dungeons and Dragons adventure system games, Wrath of a Charlatan, Legend of Drizzt, any of that stuff. It's similar to that, where the app will say, okay, this monster moves 2 spaces towards the investigator with the highest strength. And then you do that. And then it'll say, and then attacks. But if it's not in a space where anybody attacks, you click, it doesn't attack, and then whatever. So that works out pretty well. It does mean that a lot of times, once you're familiar with the different monsters, you're going to have a pretty good idea how it's going to move, and you can plan for that. For instance, when in this one scenario, the Star Spawn, one of the big monsters, came on the board, and it was always going to move 1 space towards the nearest investigator. Well, so all we had to do was just make sure the investigators, stayed away from that. It was going to move 1 space and then attack an adjacent investigator or whatever. So you could kind of game that a little bit. I will say that the game did end up doing a pretty good job of cornering us, and eventually we weren't able to run away from it anymore. But still, that's something to be aware of as far as how the monsters are going to work. If that's going to bother you, that's something else to consider. The rule books. Now, this is a Fantasy Flight 2 rule book system. A lot of people complain about this a lot. I don't understand all the complaints. I do see there are 1 or 2 complaints that I think are valid. And the most valid of the complaints is that, in the how to play, it might not cover something that some people will consider a pretty significant rule. And then maybe in the alphabetized rules reference guide, there's stuff that is not under the heading you would expect it to be under. Those 2 complaints I can understand completely. I will say that this rules reference guide I feel is very comprehensive, and I've only found 1 thing in it that I thought was out of place, and there's an issue where the rules describe if two spaces share a wall, then those spaces are adjacent. Okay, but does that mean that if this monster is adjacent to me, but there's a wall between us, it can still attack me? What does that mean? And you go into the rule book, and you look under adjacency, and you look under all, and it doesn't seem to explain it. Under walls, there's all these exceptions for, well, you can't move through walls, you can't attack through walls. Effects that affect adjacent spaces do not affect them through walls. Okay, that seems like that was a little bit fiddly, an odd way to do it. I believe maybe that's so they can, I guess there was a reason they did that. I'm sure they saw down the road for something they're going to add to the game. Maybe that makes sense to have called them adjacent and then added these exceptions. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's not in a good place in the rulebook, and it's hard to find. And it is, when the game first came out, it was the most common question on BGG. New threads were popping up all the time, talking about, the wall adjacency thing. And even now, still, the game's been out for roughly a month or so, and we're still seeing those pop up on BGG quite a bit. So I'm not sure why they did that. That was kind of a bad decision in my opinion. As far as quality components, I got to say, these tiles are fantastic. I love these room tiles. And I mean, they've got some nice color to them while still being dark. And here we've got the park pond and all this good stuff. The artwork on these tiles is amazing. Very good quality tiles. I think these are, you're not going to have any problem with these tearing up or anything like that. I really, really like these a lot. The cards, I've sleeved them all. I don't know if it's necessary. There's not a whole lot of shuffling going on. And, maybe you could probably... it's with the sanity and the horror and the damage cards. Those are the ones, because I don't want to know any sort of marking on them is going to be, it's going to let you know what's on the other side, which is a problem. And you can see they're very dark, and the darker a card is on the back, the more easily marks will show up on it. So I would recommend sleeving these, because the cards, while they actually are they're pretty good quality as far as thickness goes. They're better than a lot of stuff out there. They're still, you know, gonna mark up, and those decks you shuffle out, because every time you discard sanity or discard damage, it gets shuffled back into that deck. So there's not a separate discard pile. So it's not like once a game it gets shuffled. It's every time you discard, you shuffle those decks. On the other hand, spells also have to get shuffled every time you use a spell. So spells, horror, and damage, I would recommend sleeving for those purposes. On the other hand, the items and conditions, I've got those sleeved as well. It's more just a thing for me, where generally if I sleeve some of my cards, I'm going to sleeve them all. They're not really necessary, because there's no shuffling of those. The items are stay alphabetized in a deck, so you can search through them. It's not like you're ever randomly selecting them, unless sometimes you may have to randomly discard one. The investigator cards are kind of flimsy, but again, it's not like you're doing anything with them. They just sit down in front of you. I like they have a pretty nice backstory for all the investigators. That's pretty cool. All the chits and tokens are very good quality, very thick cardboard for all of these. They punched out real nice. They're not tearing. The dice are pretty good. They're not particularly weighty, but they are etched, so you don't have to worry about stickers coming off. They are 8-sided dice. There's 5. They should have given you more than 5 dice, and here's why. For instance, Kate Winthrop here has observation 5. Okay, so she's going to roll 5 every time she does an observation check, right? Well, what if you get one of the checks that says roll observation +1? Or what if she ends up with an item that gives her additional observation? Well, then now you got to roll and remember and roll something else. Usually not a big problem. Kind of probably a knick-knacky thing, but still, I feel like if it's going to be commonplace for at least 6 dice to be rolled, which it is pretty commonplace, I feel like you ought to have 6 dice. That's just me. So the last thing with components, I would say, is the miniatures. Now, in my opinion, the miniatures are basically on the same level of quality as the first edition, which is good in the sense that first edition was pretty decent back in the day when it came out, and good in the sense that it maintains kind of, I guess, consistency. Bad in the sense that we've come a really long way, and Cool Mini or Not has blown stuff out of the water, along with other companies, as far as what we can expect from miniatures. So while these are okay, they are not by any stretch of the imagination, amazing miniatures that we've come to expect in this hobby, especially off of a theme-heavy game that really, in my opinion, relies upon drawing you in. I feel like, a game like Mansions of Madness that has all this different stuff going on, I feel like the minis are really a big part of this. And for them not to, maybe ratchet up just a little bit, just the quality just a little bit better, it's a really missed opportunity, and I'm not a big fan of that. I think that's unfortunate. And then they decided to keep the bases from the first game with the for the monsters. Now these bases are enormous, much bigger than the monsters require, and I know that they wanted to do that for the purpose of having, well, for one thing, continuity again, but then also for the purpose of having the monster tiles in there that have the monster stats. Well, you know what? The monster stats aren't super important, or they're important, but they're not frequently used this time around. They were used a lot in the first game, like every time, because it was adjusting how, what you were rolling for. This time, the only time you use the monster's horror rating is if there's multiple monsters within range of one investigator during a horror check. Only time you use the awareness rating on a monster is if a investigator is evading when there's multiple monsters at the same time that he has to evade. The only time you use brawn is on rare occasions when a monster is going to burst through a barricade. And that's only if you set a barricade up. Or if you're going to push the monster, you use the monster's brawn as well. So much less do you use these numbers? And yet they still have them right there in the base, right there prominently, taking up all this room on the board. They should have gone with some other kind of base. Really unnecessary. So finally, replayability. What are we looking at with this game? Well, we've got 4 scenarios, right? 3 of those scenarios are what people might consider normal playing time for somebody, and then the 4th one is 4 to 6 hours is what it says. Okay, so most people are going to play that 4th one once or twice, maybe, throughout the lifetime of them having the game. The other 3 scenarios are the main ones you're starting with. All right. Now, the more stuff you have from first edition already, the more variability in the map layout. I don't know how much difference there is in the maps if you only have second edition. I don't know. I do know that having all those monsters and all the investigators makes it really cool, and I feel like adds to replayability. Fantasy Flight missed an opportunity here, and it's something they can still correct because it's right there in the app. They really should have some kind of a score system for how you do on each level so that then you can go back and try to beat your score, because otherwise you're just playing the levels over and over again. And despite them saying that there was a lot of variability in the levels, in fact, I believe they even said random setup at some point. It's not a random setup. There are specific map layouts, and that's good because a random setup would not work with the way the story is told in this game, and it tries to tell a very cohesive story, and random setups aren't good for that. However, you only have a certain number of layouts, and then most of the stuff that happens in those layouts is going to be the same as happened the last time, just in slightly different places and that sort of thing. The story, for the most part, is playing out the same way. Now, there might be differences in the story based on how quickly you progress through a level, but that's the same way it was in first edition. In terms of all those triggers are, for the most part, going to be the same. And I think that they oversold the randomness and the mix and matchiness, that's a word, of this game prior to its release. And I'm okay with it because I really like what they're doing here and I see the potential, but it's going to piss a lot of people off. And there are people that are upset and that don't like the sameness each time through. For me, this game is about the experience and introducing more and more people to it. And everybody I've introduced it to, for the most part, except for one time when the first scenario took us over 2 hours to beat. I don't know how that happened. But everybody else I've introduced this game to has loved it. So I'm really enjoying it a lot. You just need to go in knowing that this is not, it's not like it's really setting up random maps every time. It's just unlimited variability. So all that being said, my final score for this game is a 79.4, just under 80. Still a really good game. I know for sure that I like this game way better than first edition. That much is for sure. I'm able to get more plays in than first edition. That much is for sure. The setup is much easier. The teardown is much easier. I think the future for this game is going to be, it's potentially very impressive if Fantasy Flight will give us some free support along with having to pay for new levels. I'm hoping they will throw out there some gimme levels that, or some gimme scenarios that are free to buy, free to play, because people are investing quite a bit of money. 2 new expansions coming out, new expansions. They're bringing the first edition stuff in for people that don't already have first edition, but those are required to play the new levels that are coming out. So because of that, I'm hoping that they will also throw out some free levels, because otherwise, I just feel like if you have to pay every time you want a new scenario, that's going to get expensive fast. And I know that expensive fast is kind of Fantasy Flight's thing. X-Wing, Armada, all that expensive fast should be their motto. But please throw us a couple of scenarios a year for free. Is all I'm saying. We're throwing a lot of money in here on this thing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my channel, please subscribe. You can find me on Twitter @boredonlineboardoffline. You can find me on Board Game Geek. We have a guild there. Please go join it. we're going to be doing a giveaway pretty soon. We got one going on right now, and actually it's probably over by the time this video goes up, but we got another one coming up soon, so stay tuned over there. And until next time, if you're bored online, board off.